Before we begin, let me just share a quick note. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast, please share it with a friend or leave us a review. It'll certainly help a lot. Also, there'll be some links to the Ancona School in the show notes in case you want to click in and learn a little bit more or donate to a phenomenal institution here on the south side of Chicago. With that said, let's get into the episode. Back in 2004, we took our older son for a visit to a school to see if it was a good fit for his 3-year-old pre-primary year. A few years later, we took my younger son there too. Both of them had tremendous experiences at the school. Those years in the 3, 4, and 5-year-old classrooms at the Ancona School did two things for them. First, it met them where they were at, and two, it set them up to see the world and their place in it very differently. Since 2011, I've been on the board at the Ancona School. That's right, my youngest son left over 8 years ago, and it was so important to our family that we've all stayed involved in the Ancona School in some way, shape, or form since then. You could say that the Ancona School is home for my whole family. It's definitely a special place for us. Today's guest was the assistant teacher at the time in my younger son's classroom. She and Miss Ellen were amazing educators that made a huge difference in his life. I can't underscore that enough. We've certainly mourned the loss of Miss Ellen Cole a few years ago, but 20 years later, Miss Yolita Ray is the head teacher in that same classroom my son was in, and she's still teaching and helping kids grow in her special place, her pre-primary classroom at the Ancona School. I'm so excited I got a chance to talk with her in this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Today's guest is someone I met 20 years ago and have a ton of respect for. Her name is Yolita Ray, or Miss Yolita, as we still call her in our house. Miss Yolita, can you take a minute and introduce yourself to everyone that's listening?
Of course. I'm Yolita Ray. I'm a parent, an educator, a native of Chicago. I love to travel. I love photography, flower arranging, learning new things. I've been a teacher at Ancona for 27 years.
And that might give it away to everybody who knows me, but how would you say that we know each other?
Well, I was your children's preschool teacher at Ancona.
Yeah, and when we went to Ancona, we were looking for a school that was a good fit for our boys, and our oldest one was there, and it was a no-brainer to send our second one there, and our second one, our younger one, was actually in your classroom. And we really enjoyed how you all met him where he was at, and the vibe. The best way to describe it is the vibe that was in your classroom, because you had the incense burning, you had the sort of yoga-type meditation music playing, and we were dropping our kids off in two very different classrooms back then.
Absolutely. But the thing is, that's one of the things I loved about teaching at Ancona, the autonomy that we were allowed to just be ourselves, and each classroom was different.
And before we move on, since you just brought that up, let's talk for a second about the actual place that is in some ways home for both of us, the Ancona School here on the south side of Chicago in Kenwood. How would you describe Ancona?
For me personally, Ancona was truly a safe haven for my children and I. Their teachers were very loving and supportive to me and my children. One of my sons, I have twins, but one used to come home who was in Mrs. Ford's class. He would come home with this red lipstick print on his face every day. It just really put me in a space of knowing that my children were loved and truly cared for at Ancona.
Right. It was certainly a different day. We're not kissing on the kids or even spanking the kids.
No. We're not doing that anymore.
We're not doing that anymore. But, Ancona for me, my youngest graduated from there almost 10 years ago, and I'm still on the board and still involved in the school. In fact, Tasha still does new parent tours and even chaperoned the ski trip last year, which we thought was pretty funny because everybody wanted to know which kid was hers. And she's like, oh, mine's graduated college already. I just really enjoy spending time with Ancona. As a board member, I don't want to get in trouble with the current head of school, Liz. So let me say a little bit about what Ancona is to me. Ancona really helps kids become creative problem solvers, confident risk takers, and lifelong learners. And I can say that as someone who has seen my boys grow up through Ancona. It's Montessori based, but it really tries to foster learning and joy, inspiring social justice, empathy, diversity, to create ethical global citizens. And that's a little bit of the blurb from the website, but I can see that as my sons navigate the world and are not afraid to travel around the city, around the country, literally around the world. And I see you nodding. Are your sons sort of similar as products of Ancona?
Well, I was always concerned about how my kids would function outside of Ancona because I knew they wouldn't necessarily be in private school for their whole school careers. But my youngest son, who graduated from Ancona, ended up at Kenwood for high school.
Hmm.
And, he told me, he said, Mom, Ancona really helped me to be able to navigate this new world that I'm in. That really just made my heart sing because I was so concerned.
Yeah, and Ancona is a smaller school here on the south side, and Kenwood is a big high school sort of right up the street, and it's the neighborhood school that a lot of kids go to, and that transition can be really tricky. But when we chose our neighborhood when we were coming back from Boston, we wanted our boys to grow up in a diverse environment on all dimensions. And Ancona is more than a diverse place because you can have a lot of different people in one space and call yourself diverse. But what I've noticed is that it embraces all of that diversity and views it as a strength. I tell people when we came to look the very first time, so before we met you, I don't know that you know this, but we went to a classroom in the pre-primary, so down on your end of the building. They were studying Japan, so they had students coloring Japanese flags in one part, and we looked over, and there were students rolling sushi in another part. And then we hung out for an assembly, and it was Black History Month, so they were singing Negro spirituals. And we were just like, what is happening in this building? All in one day, this was all happening. And we just said, if this is just another day at Ancona, this is definitely the place for our kids.
Absolutely.
Miss Yolita, I want to talk about the first time you experienced being a teacher in the pre-primary classroom. What was that like for you? When was that experience?
Well, before I started working in a pre-primary classroom, I worked as a shadow teacher at Akiva Schechter, which is a Jewish day school in the neighborhood. I worked with a child who had learning issues for 2 years in his first and second grade classroom and his third and fourth grade classroom. But then I had my Montessori certification, but I ended up subbing at Ancona because there were no openings. Ancona teachers stay for a really long time, especially in pre-primary. I was subbing there, and Ellen's assistant had moved on, and she asked me if I would work with her. Ellen was my other twins' preschool teacher. So we worked together for 20 years.
Yeah, and Ellen was the co-teacher with you in the classroom when my son was in that
Yes,
classroom 20 years ago.
yes.
I don't think I realized that was right towards the beginning of your teaching journey because that wasn't the beginning of Ellen's teaching journey by a long shot, right?
No, I think Ellen had already been there over 20 years when I
Wow.
started working with her.
Wow. And we miss Miss Ellen. She's no longer with us, but she is a big part of my son's journey and a big part of their success. Following on to that, when did you realize that you were home in the pre-primary classroom and that it was where you meant to be? You had tried it as a sub, you had been a shadow teacher, but that honestly was probably 30 years ago at this point, and you're still
Right.
doing it. So when did you realize
Yeah.
it was where you belonged?
Well, I always tended to gravitate toward the children with special needs. I mean, after all, that was the beginning of my teaching career as a shadow teacher. But I noticed that in the classroom, we always had a child on the autism spectrum, a child who needed special attention, and I always gravitated toward those kids. And I think that really made me feel that I was valued in the classroom, that
Mhm.
my what I brought to the classroom was valuable.
Did you get a sense that the parents felt the same way, that there's a classroom of 20, 25 kids, there's two teachers, there's a lot of kids in a multi-grade classroom doing all kinds of different things. But as you were
Mm-hmm.
gravitating towards those kids and making sure they were fully included, did you get the sense that the parents recognized that sort of extra effort or extra investment?
You know, that's the other thing, and that's huge for me, that the parents saw my contributions and they appreciated it.
Mhm.
They always showed me that they appreciated what I brought to the classroom, and that gave me a really strong sense of that's where I needed to be.
And when you're in the pre-primary classroom, it's not like the upper grades at Ancona where the kids lead the parent-teacher conferences. I imagine for parents putting their kids in school for the first time, those parent-teacher conferences can be really stressful these days because they feel like if they don't nail three-year-old pre-primary, they're not going to be in college and they'll be unemployed their whole lives.
Yeah, but parent-teacher conferences I love because it gives me a chance to get to know the family, the children, and it validates that I know their children because often they'll say, "Wow, Miss Yolita, that's what we're seeing at home."
Hmm.
And that lets me know that I know their kids, and it lets them know that I also know their kids.
And just so I'm clear, how long have you been at Ancona teaching in the pre-primary now?
This is my 27th year.
Okay, so I want to get into what's special about your home in the pre-primary classroom. What stands out to you? Where should we start?
Well, no matter how I feel when I leave home, when I get to school and the children are coming to me saying, "Good morning, Miss Yolita," and they come to me and tell me, what's going on in their lives, it totally gets me out of my head and focused on them. And that, I don't know, it just makes me feel like that this is my home outside of home.
Yeah, and you're in a 3, 4, and 5-year-old classroom, so they bring a different energy every day. How do you show up as you every day when the kids are bringing God knows what from home and from the commute to school and all the things that happen with siblings and all that good stuff? Because it seems like it'd be a bit of a wild card as to what class you're going to have on any given day, even though it's the same kids every day.
Well, I think because the children feel that the classroom is their home also. They come in with a sense of confidence. This is my place. I know what's going on, and they just come in like it's their second home.
That's really neat to hear because as your kids are coming in and feeling like their classroom is home, I know that's true of a lot of the classrooms at Ancona. And when we were preparing for this, you talked about how Ancona becomes a community as a school, and your classroom becomes its own little community in that bigger community. Is that also special for you as you think about showing up every day for the kids?
Oh my goodness, yes. Every day, at least one older kid will come in and say, "Hi, Miss Yolita," or I'll see him in the hallway. And it just fills my heart with joy when they come and run and they're taller than I am and give me a big hug.
And you live in the neighborhood. I know my son, when he was up in the upper grades, would still come down to your classroom when he felt like he needed a timeout from whatever was going on in his classroom. But you also live in the neighborhood. So do you see the neighborhood kids and kids that you taught, years before?
Oh my goodness, yes, all the time. And one incident that really kind of threw me off was I was getting out of my car, and this 6 foot guy with these long dreadlocks came over and said, "Miss Yolita." And I didn't know who he was, but I was thinking, well, obviously he knows who I am. So I stopped and I looked at his face and I realized who he was. And we had a talk, and I asked him about how school was going, and he was telling me where he was in school, and he asked if I needed help with my bags. And it just, I don't know, it was like a big hug. He seemed so happy to see me. And that totally threw me off. But it also made me feel like that I make a difference in kids' lives, no matter how old they are.
Miss Yolita, it was funny hearing the story about getting stopped by a student who was so much older. I was never a teacher, but I did work in middle school for a year on my college thesis, and I was tutoring in Chicago every weekend, and it's wild to see kids grow up. But I was usually working with middle school kids or high school kids. Kids almost double their lifespan in your classroom, going from 3 years old to 5, or in some cases 6 years old. Is that something that stands out to you as special about the work that you're doing? I mean, you see kids literally grow up year to year, and in some cases within the year, because they're so young, they grow so fast.
Absolutely. I actually see, it seems like most recently, I see growth in children much sooner. Before it was like, okay, by the spring break, I really see how they've grown, the 3 year olds, how they've grown, how 4 year olds in kindergarten. But most recently, I've seen growth in children from the beginning of in September until the first parent teacher conference in November.
Mm-hmm.
So, and especially in terms of social emotional growth, not so much academic because that's something that develops over time. But socially and emotionally is where children these days seem to struggle most, especially since the pandemic.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because most people think about a classroom as just academics and teaching kids their numbers and their alphabet and how to read. But it sounds like you're trying to teach something more than that. It's that and what's in the and?
The and is, I feel like the greatest purpose of children being in preschool is to help them to learn to be a part of a community, how to make friends, how to coexist with other children. The academics will come, but if socially, emotionally, if they don't know how to make friends, if they don't have friends, it makes the learning a lot more difficult.
Do you see that when kids come into your classroom at 3 years old, or do we have kids come in, at 4 years old, or even in kindergarten in your multi-grade classroom?
Absolutely, especially with older children, because children tend to adapt better socially and emotionally when they've been at Ancona for 3 years, because they've gone through the whole process. But when children come in and they've been at a different school or whatever, had a different experience as a kindergartner, they need a little more care. And, they have to adapt really quickly to things that they're not used to. I mean, it's a huge jump.
And what are some of the things that you do in the classroom to make that happen? Because I've seen it happen many times over my relationship with the school, but I'm never really sure how it works. I know how it looks when the eighth graders are leading adults on tours of the school confidently and sharing about Ancona, but how does that actually happen in the classroom, especially at that young age?
It's funny because every time I've ever told someone who never worked in a Montessori classroom that I'm a Montessori teacher, they say, "Oh, that's that way of teaching where kids just do whatever they want." And I'm like, no, no. There is structured time set out in the morning. We have a morning meeting. Children understand that they are expected to sit for a certain amount of time, not too long. They understand that. And it's all about expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Children will rise to the occasion if the expectations are clear,
Mm-hmm.
and especially operating in a group. And so we have our morning meeting. They know what the routine is. We say a morning poem, a kindness poem, kind of sets the tone for the day. And when I was with Ellen, we used to do yoga, but we moved on to the morning meeting, and it works just as well because it gives the kids a chance to talk about the things that are going to happen for the rest of the day.
But even though you have some of that structure to the day, the kids are still empowered to make their own decisions, and they can sort of navigate the day, or in some cases the week for some of the older kids,
Mm-hmm.
and make their decisions. How do you keep that all organized across such a group of, I'll say, energetic, having seen that group in the morning?
Well, the good thing and the best thing about the multi-age classroom is that kindergartners come back from the summer. They've been in the classroom for 3 years. They know. They know what the rules are. They know what to do. And they do most of the heavy lifting for us with the new kids because they love telling each other what to do, feeling like they're empowered. I think a lot of children at that age really, their objective is to have some kind of control over their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And the more in control that they feel, or more empowered that they feel, the more confidence they'll have, and they'll move in ways that are helpful to us and helpful to them too. And before you know it, the classroom is pretty much operating on its own. And Maria Montessori said the sign of success in a classroom is when the classroom operates in a way that a teacher is not really needed. When the teacher can sit back and observe and watch the children work and move about in ways that are not disruptive, with purpose, that's when you know you have a successful classroom.
Miss Yolita, when we were preparing for this and putting together an outline, you did talk about, and I talked about at the top, how social justice is part of the fabric of the mission and the community at Ancona. How does that manifest itself in a 3, 4, and 5-year-old classroom? Because I know that is special to you, but I want to make sure that other people who are like, well, what can you do social justice wise with a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, that they'll actually understand? How does that work for you?
Well, we teach social justice through literature. There are lots of children's books about social justice issues. Women's History Month, when it comes up, We read books about famous women, and the kids talk about, we talk about how, women weren't always allowed to work and make their own money and make their own decisions. And, is that fair? I mean, and I approach it from a sense of fairness.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair? And the same with Black History Month. We read about books about Martin Luther King when he was a child and his experience with discrimination. After I read the book, we have discussions. Is that fair? What do you think about that? And you'd be amazed at the ideas that they come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And I always do a Native American unit right before Columbus Day because I want the kids to know why there's a holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want them to know that this might not be a person we want to celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better, I think, to honor the people who are most affected. And I'll ask the kids, I'll read stories to them about modern day Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And, because I'll ask them, do you think Native Americans are still alive? And, some of them will say yes, and some will say no. And I'll read the book just to give them an idea that these are people, that these are real people that this happened to
Mm-hmm.
years ago. But it's important to know, what happened, for them to understand a sense of fairness, what that means.
Do you get a lot of pushback from parents on these types of things? Because this is
You know,
also, these are also topics that some parents might prefer their kids not get exposed to early on.
I think for the most part, parents, when their kids come home and say, Mom, did you know that Christopher Columbus wasn't a good guy? They're like, wow. I think they're really pleased at us giving them this information,
Mm-hmm.
And not really trying to sway them one way or the other. But, that they have this information and they understand it. They understand what's fair and what's not.
Yeah, and I remember you all used to do a module around discrimination, and I don't want to spoil it in case it shows up in another classroom later, but I will say that my kid came home very empowered to speak about the discrimination he saw in his life. In that case, it had to do with going upstairs and getting ready for bed, which was not really discrimination as my wife and I saw it. But I think he was starting to internalize, and fast forward 20 years, and he's doing a PhD in sociology, studying some of the exact same issues he learned in your classroom 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Ellen always taught a unit on discrimination, and she would use the children age. She would use their age instead of something personal about them.
Mm-hmm.
And she would say only the kindergartners can use the big toilets, or only the little kids can have more than one snack, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids, and I would egg them on. I would say, well, let's protest, let's make signs.
I think my son's year was one of those years where they made signs and marched down to the principal's office and demanded that
Yes,
Miss Ellen get fired, I believe was the demand.
exactly. You know, Actually, I just want to bring this up. A parent, for the first time in all these years, actually came to me with a concern about social justice. She had gotten an email from the school about social justice being taught to the youngest.
Mm-hmm.
And her concern was around ICE. And she said, I don't want my child to be afraid in this climate. I want her to be a 3-year-old and worry about ice cream or whatever she was saying. And I said, well, we wouldn't be teaching the children about ICE because, first of all, it's not age appropriate.
Right.
Because it's too complicated to explain.
What I've seen from all of the classrooms at Ancona is similar to where you're going, which is it's age appropriate, first of all. So the context on any social justice or other issue or topic is age appropriate. For me, what I've seen is that makes the kids less afraid of their own city. It makes them less afraid of the other that so many people are afraid of. And yeah, for a 3-year-old, it might not be talking about ICE, but it might be talking about community, and it might be talking about family, and it might be talking about exploring new places and things like that they can relate to.
Exactly. And the fact that nowadays family compositions are different. Some kids have 2 moms, some kids have 2 dads. We read books about that and we talk about it. And we've even had children in our class who had those experiences. So it's always been really positive.
One thing that I want to unpack a little bit more is that feeling that you get when you see the kids grow up and graduate high school and graduate college and come back. Because I know they come back, because both of my sons have come back to the school multiple times. But you're really at the beginning for them, except for the ones that might have been in daycare. You're their first teacher. You're the first one who sees them come to school in a bad mood and calms them down or gives them the tools to navigate life in some ways. Can you describe what that feels like to see that happen? I mean, you now have hundreds of kids that are navigating the world with the foundation you built for them when they were 3, 4, or 5 years old in your classroom. What does that feel like every day?
Well, it actually makes me feel a stronger sense of responsibility in terms of my practice. I feel it's important to continue to grow as an educator, to continue to educate myself. You know, I've always built my education when I went back to school for my master's, and I worked on a PhD for a while, but during the pandemic, I wasn't able to finish my research. So I ended up with a educational specialist degree. I've always focused my education on my practice. You know, what are the needs of my classroom?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and as the years go by, it becomes more and more important to be educated, to be on top of the best practices and, you know, what's new. So I just feel more obligated to continue to improve my practice.
What was interesting for me when we were talking earlier this week about your practice and your education is that you've actually taken classes and studied how to work with parents as well, which is interesting because you're teaching the kids, not the parents. What am I missing?
Well, when I started graduate school at DePaul, they had a pilot program, parenting education and support. And I thought, oh, this is great because the parents need it so much. And I wanted to approach parent education in a way that would be most helpful to parents. And so my bachelor's degree was in parenting education and support from DePaul. So I'm a certified parent educator, certified in applied behavior analysis, because we've always had children on the autism spectrum in our classroom. I did the behavior analysis training to help me to better learn how to deal with the children and the parents.
It's interesting because at the end of the day, after a couple of years in your classroom, not only are the kids better suited to go on with first grade, second grade, and beyond, but it sounds like the parents and the entire family unit is better equipped to deal with whatever comes next as a challenge.
I hope so.
Awesome. Well, I know the Bears are probably playing soon. As we're talking, people can't see, but you've got the Walter Payton jersey on, and it's game day today. I want to thank you for joining today. As I said at the top, you and Miss Ellen were a huge blessing from my family and my son's life, and we're tremendously grateful for that. And for those of you listening, I will drop a link to the Ancona School in the show notes, as well as a link to donate if you like what you heard on this podcast and you like what you see. Ancona is a small private school here on the south side of Chicago doing really phenomenal work. And Miss Yolita, you are a big part of that phenomenal work, and I want to thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really, truly been an honor.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes automatically. You can go to myhomeisspecial.com to see the full project and sign up for email updates. Be sure to follow KBevPhoto on Instagram or go to kbevphoto.com to see what I'm snapping these days. There's a lot on both to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.